Hello. One of the persistent issues in these not such great times in the United States concerns the question of marijuana. Should it be legal or should it be decriminalized? And it has become something of a litmus test among people who claim to be progressive as to whether they want to completely legalize marijuana or not, as Washington State has apparently done, and as Colorado has done, and I believe Alaska has also done. And there are lots of people around who say you can't claim to be progressive unless you want complete legalization of marijuana. They say it's not that harmful, that it's not that big a deal, and that it's mainstream, and that people do it all the time, and that it should be completely legal to use marijuana recreationally. So I'm going to tell you my point of view on this thing. I absolutely do believe that marijuana should be available as a prescription drug if there is a real possibility that it's going to help some people improve their quality of life, or get rid of some chronic pain, or deal with some chronic pain, or make things better for people who have serious health problems. Now, I'm kind of a data guy. I like facts, and from what I'm able to determine, the issue of whether marijuana is beneficial in health terms for a lot of people is somewhat debatable. Data seems to be somewhat lacking. At the same time, this is 2016, this time I'm speaking. We're well into the space age, and the so-called space age, and there's still an awful lot of major health problems that happen to people that we just don't have an effective way to deal with. I knew someone, a senior, as a matter of fact, he's in his 70s, had knee replacement surgery, total knee replacement, this past summer. And although it appears he's getting better, he's described this as the worst experience that he ever had in his life. The pain was almost unbearable. And he had to go through this to fix his knee in the space age. We still can't cure a lot of cancer. Cancer treatments are more effective than they have been before, but we're still a long way from being able to cure all cancer. Sometimes cancer treatments work for people, sometimes they don't. There are all kinds of things that happen to people that we don't have a good way to fix. There are things you can do to your musculoskeletal system that once you have that kind of damage, or the arthritis or whatever is wrong with your musculoskeletal system, lower back pain, upper back pain, neck pain, and that sort of thing. Once certain things happen to you, we just don't have a very good way to deal with those things. And people a lot of times end up on permanent disability with extremely painful problems. And there doesn't seem to be a really good solution to a lot of things that happen to people in our society. Even though we're well into the so-called space age, there's still a lot of pain and suffering that goes on, and a lot of diseases and disorders and injuries that we can't seem to deal with very well. Well, in those cases, I absolutely believe that marijuana, if there's a reasonable possibility that it's going to help some people, that if it's going to reduce pain, that if it's going to enhance their quality of life, then I absolutely believe it should be available. That's just the humane thing to do. It is the merciful thing to do. Who wants people to go through life suffering in terrible pain, or trapped by constant nervous tension if it's kind of a mental disorder, which really we don't have very good ways to treat mental disorders in our society. It's basically medication, and that's pretty much it for a lot of the mental disorders that we have in our society. So, should marijuana be available as a prescription medication? I'm saying absolutely yes. If it can reduce pain, if it can improve someone's quality of life. But what about this issue of recreational use? Well, I'm not nearly as enthusiastic about that. I kind of grew up in an environment in which marijuana use was sort of looked down on. It was believed that decent people just didn't do that sort of thing. And I know the experiences that I'm about to relate are anecdotal, and they're just my experiences, but I've got to say that nothing in my personal experience has changed my view of marijuana that much. Now, the first question you'll want to know is, have I ever tried it? Yes, twice. I have tried it twice in my life. Did it make that big of an impression? Actually, no. Didn't think that much of it. Haven't tried it since, and may not ever try it again. I just don't see that much of a benefit or much of a good thing to it. I'd much rather drink a margarita, a cold beer, something like that. So my experience with marijuana was just kind of nothing. You know, I did smoke it, that's for sure, but it just didn't do a whole lot for me. And then I see what's happened in the lives of some other people. I had a good friend who told me, and he had a habit of getting in a lot of trouble for a lot of years, doing some really stupid things, and you wonder how in the world he was ever able to survive. But he told me about this incident where he went out partying with some people that he worked with, and he actually didn't know those people very well, and that's a really stupid thing to do. You go out partying at somebody else's home and you don't really know them, and you're going to be doing this kind of risky behavior. But they were into smoking some weed and doing some other things. Smoking weed wasn't the only thing they were doing. There were some other things going on too. But he ended up, you know, his experience smoking marijuana, he ended up collapsing out in this field somewhere and was out there lying flat on his back in sort of a stupor, with this memory of people out there looking for him with flashlights. And you know, to be laying flat on your back out in the field in the woods in Alabama, which is where this was, that's not a very safe thing to do, to be doing, for a number of reasons. I'm listening to this story and I'm thinking, how stupid can somebody be? But that's the situation that smoking marijuana got him into. And then a few years later, when I was living in Bessemer, Alabama, I had worked a telecommunications job down there and had gotten laid off from it. And I lived in this apartment complex in Bessemer, Alabama, and I had this downstairs neighbor named Lester. And he obviously had some issues of the mind. His elevator, I didn't think, quite went all the way up to the top. He was not very successful at anything, had never really been very successful at anything, and that by itself doesn't say too much in a state like Alabama, because in Alabama you can be the smartest people there and you can be the hardest working people there and get absolutely nowhere. It's that kind of a state. It's a very poor place. But it was obvious to me that he had some kind of issues, that he was just not very motivated, that his mind just wasn't that clear. And the thing that I discovered about him was he was a major pothead, and he never seemed to actually try to do very much to try to secure any kind of future for himself. He had a lot of failed ventures and was a Birmingham city firefighter for a couple of days, and then he got hurt, and because of that injury they let him go. And he had tried to get into medical school out of college and was declined everywhere he tried to go because his grades were not high enough, B's and C's averages, and trying to get in medical school, and all he ever got was declinations, and I think he'd majored in biology or something like that. But occupationally he was just never very successful, and I knew from dealing with this guy and from seeing with him every day, because he kind of latched on to me to sort of be a friend to him, and I was as best as I could, because he was getting to the point where he was desperately poor. And an interesting thing about that was that a year or two before, his mother had died, and he inherited quite a bit of money from her. And instead of thinking about the future, this guy went on a tour through Asia. I think it started in India or somewhere along in there, and went on a tour through Asia and sort of Middle East, and then to the Netherlands, where he could smoke all the pot he wanted, just blowing the money right and left. And there was no thought about any kind of a future. So by the time he got back to the United States, I don't know how long this tour went on. I think it may have been for several months. By the time he got to the United States, he'd spent all this money and was moving toward the poorhouse, so to speak, and essentially had no future. He didn't have any kind of a good income prospect for the future. He just blew all this money, and he was a major pothead. Read this newspaper, this magazine called the High Times all the time. And then later on, I worked with a couple of people in an office environment who I knew that they were using pot, knew that, and I also saw some behavior that didn't impress me too much. And one of them in particular was this totally inappropriate laughing. I mean, just unbelievable laughing, just completely inappropriate during the work day, and that went on so much I started thinking, that I don't believe they're thinking right, or this one particular person anyway. I'm not so sure about her thought processes and if she's thinking right. And there was no danger involved because it was an office environment. There was no operating equipment. There was any danger to anybody or anything like that. But it was always in my mind that her mind was being affected to a certain degree by this pot usage or something like that. And I'm obviously not going to mention the name. It was just an impression that I had. And generally speaking, the people that I've known that have been pot smokers, marijuana users, I've always had this impression that their minds weren't functioning correctly, that there were some issues upstairs, and that's been true every single time. And then you have people like the President of the United States, Barack Obama, said that he thought that marijuana was almost completely safe and not dangerous, anything like that. And then I hear of a couple of deaths over in Germany, I think, because apparently marijuana does something crazy to your heart rate. And as one who suffers from hypertension, I think that's very dangerous to be using a substance that's going to affect your cardiovascular system like that. Now, there are people who would look at this as kind of a hypocritical message. They say, well, you're a drinker, aren't you? Yeah, of course I'm a drinker. And I had to learn some lessons about abuse. There is a big difference between abuse and use. Consider if you're going to be drinking some night. Well, here's a good guide. It's just a rule of thumb, but it's sort of a guide as to whether you're abusing or using in a normal fashion. Get up the next morning, you feel good, or you feel normal, you're probably okay. Get up the next morning and you've got a hangover, you got a headache, and you're severely hydrated, and you feel kind of disoriented, then you're probably into abuse. And I had done some abuse in the past. I did learn my lesson. I like to get up and feel good. I don't like to get up and feel lousy. And so now I'm in the moderate drinker category. I'd like to have Italian food with Lambrusco. I like fajitas and margaritas. And on weekends, a lot of times, I like cold beer in the evenings. But this business of getting totally plastered like I used to do a long time ago, the health consequences are too bad from that. You get these terrible hangovers. You never had a hangover. I hope you never have one, because it'll be one of the worst feelings you've ever been through in your life. Your head is pounding. You're dehydrated. You get digestive problems. You start gaining weight. It just causes all kind of problems. So if you're going to be a alcohol drinker like I am, be responsible about it. You'll feel a lot better. Your health is a lot better. And your life won't be like some boring teetotaler either. But I can't say that I've ever seen good come from recreational marijuana use. Some people claim it does something for them, but I've never seen any good from it. And I know that's anecdotal evidence, and it's from my experience. But the point is, I've never had anything in my experience convince me that recreational marijuana use is good or useful or even safe. So it's hard to be for legalizing something like that for recreational use when you've seen the effects that it's had on people, the way I've seen it. So this is a position that will make a lot of progressive people mad, and it might make some conservative people mad too. I have a habit of being able to make everybody mad with my position. I'm very much for medical marijuana in cases where it could benefit people. With regard to recreational use, no, not so much. There are plenty of things you can do for recreation, plenty of things you can do, have fun. I don't see any benefit from that recreationally speaking. I think it could in fact be a gateway drug, and I've seen the negative effects that it's had on people that I've known that have used it, and so I just can't support that. So to me, the reasonable position is marijuana, make it a prescription drug, yes. Otherwise, don't see a lot of need for any change. And that's one man's opinion on the subject of marijuana. Have a good day.